Welcome to Tsne's North East. Tonight we've got Mark Devlin talking about Aleister Crowley, not Prince. Prince is tomorrow. So if you sit down, turn your phones on to silent, please. Save your questions till the end. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll have a very good night. Okay? I'm handed over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Maureen. I'm up here so often now, I'll be speaking with a Geordie accent soon, I tell you. Or maybe not. So, tonight's talk, as Maureen mentioned, is all about Aleister Crowley, the notorious Victorian-era occultist, and his connections to the music industry. And on the surface of it, there ought not to be any connections at all between this individual and an institution that is supposed to be all about fun and entertainment. But as anyone who's taken more than a cursory glance at my work will be aware, the music industry is about rather more than just what lies on the surface. And when it comes to the influence of the dark occult and symbolism and ritual and mind control and so many other elements, we find evidence of it throughout the history of this industry. So in this talk, we'll be looking at many of the prominent acts who've shown a reverence towards Crowley and his various works. It'll be a two-parter, so the first part will probably be running for about 50 minutes or so. Take a bit of a break, just 10 minutes. These breaks have a tendency of wandering on a bit. We just want it to be a quick 10 minutes to stretch your legs and grab a cup of tea, and then we'll be back for part two. And as Maureen also mentioned, I'm back here tomorrow afternoon for anyone that can make it back, 1 o'clock, doing a talk on occult aspects of Prince. Really looking forward to getting into that one. I'll be road testing it for the first time. I've never taken that particular one out before. This talk is one that I put together for the Questioning History Conference. Excellent event run by Gloria Moss. This took place last summer in Battle in East Sussex. And this was the full-length presentation looking at Crowley's influence on the music industry. So this is only the second time I've delivered this, so anything could happen. We'll see how it goes. So as Julie Andrews advised in The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. When it comes to Aleister Crowley, he was born on the 12th of October, 1875, in Royal Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, just down the road a bit from Birmingham, in this building. He was born into a brewing family, and it was quite a wealthy sort of upbringing that he had, to the point that he inherited a vast sum of wealth from the family business, and that meant that he never actually had to go out and get a proper day job. And this allowed him to pursue his studies of spirituality and various aspects of the occult without having to worry about where his salary was coming from. So it put him in a fairly unique position. Very much a product of the Victorian era. And this is where it all ended. He died on the 1st of December 1947 in this boarding house in Hastings, actually, just along the road from Battle, where I first delivered this presentation. Reportedly a broken, penniless man after an extremely eventful and very colourful life at the age of 72. More on this as we progress. Just for the moment, sticking with locations connected to Crowley, as well as the Leamington and the Hastings houses, there's one particular dwelling that he had for a short period in London, in the Marylebone area. And the address given for it was 2 All Souls Place in Fitzrovia. This is it on Google Maps. I only found out about this in relatively recent times, and looking at where this address actually falls in central London, it turns out to be directly opposite a building which I'm sure many of you will recognise. BBC Broadcasting House. What were the chances? So right across the road from this iconic location, which has become infamous and notorious for all the wrong reasons in recent years, we find one of Crowley's former abodes. Broadcasting House, as I'm sure many in this room will be aware, has been the subject of much scrutiny in recent years owing to the nature of the statue that sits above the entrance threshold there. It's taken from a Shakespeare play, The Tempest, evidently, and it involves two characters known as Ariel and Prospero, which is the name given to the statue, carved by a notorious known paedophile by the name of Eric Gill, and it depicts a naked male child writhing against the crotch of a naked male adult who appears to be enjoying the sensation immensely. So it's a scenario that I'm sure Crowley might have approved of, given his involvement in what's known as sex magic, among his various other activities. And it very much characterises the true nature of the BBC and what that particular organisation is all about, as we're coming to discover more and more by the week. Staying with notorious Crowley locations, before we get started on some aspects of his life and his connections into some of these rock musicians, we have a particular song here which addresses one of his former gaffes. And it's concerning this location on the shores of Loch Ness, Scotland, a place by the name of Boleskine House, subject of many a myth, many a legend. And this was addressed in the song Synchronicity 2 by the group The Police when they put this out in 1983. The lyric reading, "Many miles away, there's a shadow on the door of a cottage on the shore of a dark Scottish lake." It's a direct reference to Boleskine. We'll get to that in a moment. The Police, incidentally, very much a CIA manufactured band. As I've mentioned in quite a few previous talks, they are the product of the Copeland family. So Stuart Copeland, best known as the drummer with the Police, was one of three sons of Miles Copeland Sr., who was a big-time CIA career operative with postings all around the world in a very lengthy and colourful career. So the three sons were all put to use in the music industry. There was Ian Copeland, there was Miles Copeland Jr., and there was Stuart Copeland. Besides the band The Police, the Copeland brothers also ran a number of organisations that were all connected with the punk and new wave scene at the tail end of the 1970s. And given that they pretty much came out of the CIA, they were keeping a gatekeeping watch over the way those particular genres developed. And the organisations that they set up were intended in very large part to police, forgive the pun, many of the other acts that were being risen up to prominence. So everything was being kept on a very short leash. It was all very controlled. And we were given a little bit of a clue as to the true nature of these three brothers and the organisations that they had through the names of the companies that they set up. So the sort of umbrella holding company for many of their activities was known as Copeland International Artists, or CIA for short. And then they also ran a company called Frontier Booking International, which was concerned with booking gigs for many of these prominent artists from those fields. They also had another one called International Records Syndicate. So with all these organisations, the initials are giving you a little hint into the true government-connected and controlled nature of these organisations and what they're there to do. And then, of course, you have the Police, as in policing the other bands on the scene, featuring Sting, as in Sting Operation. Real name Gordon Sumner, hails from around these parts, I think. Yeah, and the cover story that we were given for how he got his name Sting was that in the early days, he used to like wearing yellow and black striped jerseys that made him look like a bee. Are we buying it? No, me neither. Anyway, just a little aside there on the Police. There'll probably be a few more. So this is Boleskine House, which sits on the south shore of Loch Ness, way up there in the Scottish Highlands. And this was a 17th century hunting lodge, which Aleister Crowley got the opportunity to purchase in the early 1900s. He was there for a very short period from, I think it was around about 1900 to about 1904. And he's said to have conducted many a seance and complex ritual at this place, so much so that all kinds of myths and legends have hung over the place ever since. And it's had this reputation for being quite a dark, unsettling place that you wouldn't necessarily want to spend a night at. The site is said to have originally housed a kirk or a church, which is said, according to legend, to have burnt to the ground mysteriously with the congregation still inside at some point, which was the beginning of the sort of dark legend which has surrounded this place. So Crowley was there for a short period, as I say, and there's one particularly complex ritual which he's said to have begun to conduct, where he had conjured up some kind of entity. But he was then called away urgently on business by MacGregor Mathis, his partner in the Order of the Golden Dawn, and he had to go to Paris at very short notice, and he didn't have time to complete the ritual, which means that he didn't get onto the part which sent the entity away again, which he'd been successful in conjuring up. So the story goes. And also, the sightings of the Loch Ness Monster of myth and legend are said to have begun a short while after Crowley took residence at Boleskine House. So whether that's down to coincidence or not, we can only speculate. But we get our first connection into the music industry here when it comes to Boleskine from the fact that Jimmy Page, legendary guitarist of Led Zeppelin, was very much into the works of Aleister Crowley. So Jimmy Page ran a bookstore in London's Kensington which dealt with arcane and occult literature, and he was very much into the writings of Crowley. So when Boleskine House came up for sale in 1971, Jimmy Page jumped at the chance of purchasing it, and he owned this place from 1971 through to 1991. And in that 20-year period, we're told, he spent no more than 12 nights sleeping in the house himself. So you've got to wonder why he didn't choose to make rather more of his investment. For some reason, he just didn't particularly want to be there. I mean, I know Boleskine is a bitch to get to from London, but even so. So this is Page outside of Boleskine as it looked in 1971. And I've got an excerpt from a documentary here, just a short clip, which goes into Jimmy Page's obsession with Crowley and the world of the occult. I'm not sure if the sound is going to work. We'll give it a go, but... Just give me a second, I'll try and fix the sound settings, because it may be in the computer settings here. I told you it was only the second time I've done this one, didn't I? To be fair, I just added this video segment in at the last minute. So let's have a look. Well, it might just be my output settings. This will look good on the video, won't it? Mm-hmm. This computer is very old. Who knows a tune? Should we ever sing a song?
Happy birthday to you.
No, we did that yesterday. Thanks, by the way.
Picking up somebody's phone.
I have to work to it.
Anything but what's playing through there? Got Radio 2 there.
That's alright. The morning was inside the radio.
There we go. There we go. All right, let's give it another go.
Legendary guitarist Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. How much was he into the occult and Aleister Crowley? Well, in fact, Jimmy Page was interested in Aleister Crowley before Led Zeppelin even existed. When the band got huge success and the money started pouring in that each of them could buy a mansion, Jimmy Page heard that one of Aleister Crowley's former residences was up for sale. That was the cottage estate in Scotland on the shores of Loch Ness called Boleskine. Jimmy actually bought it in 1970. He believed it would be a great place to write songs for his band Led Zeppelin. By that time, Jimmy Page had already accumulated quite a large collection of Crowley stuff over the years, including his books, his artwork and paintings, his ceremonial robes, and magical implements. The story goes that after Jimmy Page bought Boleskine, he asked his bandmates to join him in a magic ritual based on Crowley's writings to help the band get huge success. All of them participated in the spell except for John Paul Jones, who decided to stay away from all that weird stuff. After the spell was committed, Led Zeppelin released their third studio album on October 5th, 1970, and two of Aleister Crowley's quotes appeared on the Run Out Groove on each side of the vinyl record. Do As Thou Wilt on one side, and So Mote It Be on the other. I personally have the album and have seen that written on the inside of the Run Out Groove there on the album. The cover of their fourth studio album, Led Zeppelin 4, featured an image of Hermit from the Tarot, and the four esoteric symbols meant to represent the band.
Okay, cuts off there, but you get the gist of Page's interest in Crowley and this particular location. Well, Boleskine House burnt to the ground shortly before Christmas in 2015 in very suspicious circumstances. So at that point it was owned by a Dutch family who say that they had gone out to nearby Inverness to do some Christmas shopping, and when they came back in the middle of the afternoon they found the house ablaze. And nobody saw anything, nobody knows how it started, there's been no answers to these questions given. This is what it looks like in its gutted form. And this is some wreckage of the place which I took myself when I went up there in 2019. I was on a family holiday in Scotland and it was a boring rainy day, and what else do you do, you know, but to climb up to the residence of a notorious occultist and take a few snaps. So this is what the wreckage looks like. And you might have trouble seeing it on this image because it's quite dark, but in the frame here behind the beam, you've got what appears to be an animal face with an eye very visible. You can see it much more clearly in the original. And I didn't notice this until I looked at the pictures after I'd got back. I didn't notice it when I actually took the photograph. And with a little stretch of the imagination, it could be the face of some sort of animal, possibly a cow. Interesting thing about Boleskine is that many of you might be aware of the broadcaster Kev Baker. He used to have the Kev Baker Show, a Scottish guy. He was on, which network was it? Truth Freedom Radio, I think it might have been.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Truth Frequency Radio, thanks. Yeah, for many years. And very tragically, Kev passed away last year at the age of 41 of some kind of heart condition. And for quite a few years before he died, he'd spoken of how his health had really taken a downturn after he'd paid a visit to Boleskine House. So, like me, he'd gone up there to have a dig around the place, and he'd heard all the legends about Crowley. And he says that he felt this very dark, brooding, unsettling atmosphere around the place, and he never really felt the same afterwards. And then his health sort of started to take a dip, and that's how it all ended last year. But there are certainly suggestions of a curse hanging over the place, and from the very thick energy that you feel when you're up there, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. Anyway, there's now a campaign underway to restore Boleskine House to its former glory. This is part of the campaign, help us put a new roof on Boleskine House. And it's coming from those nice people at the Ordo Templi Orientis, aka the OTO, which is one of the secret society mystery schools which Crowley once helmed. So this is coming from my current book, Musical Truth 3. The battle appears to be ongoing, with the OTO now reportedly owning some 4 hectares of the site and having earmarked £1.4 million to restore it through their Boleskine House Foundation as the leading satanic temple in Britain. This, if achieved, would make it a place of pilgrimage for Satanists and dark occultists from all over the world, and, given these groups' enthusiasm for human child sacrifices, would pose a potential deadly threat for children everywhere. What could possibly go wrong? Staying with Led Zeppelin, we come to this particular work from Crowley, his book titled Magic in Theory and in Practice, and looking at one of the excerpts from this, we find him guiding the new initiate or adept into his ways of working into these tenets. And they're all expressions of the mindset, the ideology of Satanism, which is effectively a worldview. And it seeks to take that which is inherent and natural to creation, that which represents truth and light, and to twist and contort it and turn it on its head, so that what you end up with is the 180-degree opposite of what you started. This is the theme of the brilliant book by Fergus Greenwood, which has just been released. I believe he was up here giving a talk just recently. And the title of it, 180 Degrees, refers to this very principle of taking everything and flipping it upside down and back to front. So this is part of the way Satanists wish to see the world. And they see themselves as their own gods, effectively, and rather than be in service to the rest of creation and to the Most High, the one true creative force, they prefer to be of service to self, to the ego. This is all part of the satanic mindset. So it's all inversion, and from this book we find this tenet of let the adept train himself to think backwards by external means, as set forth here following. Let him learn to write backwards. Let him learn to walk backwards. And my mind always goes to Michael Jackson's Moonwalk whenever I hear of that one. Let him listen to phonograph records reversed. This is where we get into the concept of backmasked messages placed deliberately into recorded music. More of that very shortly. Let him practice speaking backwards. We hear that in satanic temples, they recite the words of the Lord's Prayer in reverse, because again, it's that inversion of everything. And let him learn to read backwards. This is from Crowley's Book of Magic, published, not exactly sure which year, but sometime in the 1920s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So we're still with Led Zeppelin, and we're with their album Led Zeppelin 4, released in 1971, right around the time when Jimmy Page would have bought Boleskine House. And of course, we're talking about arguably Led Zeppelin's most famous song, Stairway to Heaven. So when it comes to the phenomenon of backmasking in recorded music, Stairway to Heaven is often cited as an example of this principle in operation. There are various segments of the song which are said to contain hidden messages which can only be discerned properly when the record is played backwards. So I think I've got an example next. Yeah, we have an example of a section of the song played forwards. So this is the familiar part that most people will be aware of. And then we're going to listen to that same excerpt in reverse to see if we can hear anything coming through. So here's the first part of the song played forwards.
Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on.
Okay, so listen to that same piece of music flipped around in reverse. Did you hear anything? All right, shall we play it again? Pay attention, see what you hear. So supposedly, what you hear at the start of that comes out sounding very similar to "Here's to my sweet Satan." Let's listen one more time and listen out for that particular phrase.
Yes, there are two paths you can go by. Purification, my sweet Satan. All of it up high for great yourself, who's power and Satan.
There's some other stuff going on in there as well, but the important line is "Here's to my sweet Satan," and there's other references to Satan as well. So what could be happening here? Well, when it comes to backmasking, there are two ways in which this phenomenon finds itself into recorded music. The first is with the conscious knowledge of the music maker. So it's placed in there deliberately and they know exactly what they're doing. For those of you that will be attending my talk on Prince tomorrow afternoon, we'll be hearing an example of that in one of Prince's songs. Also, this phenomenon cropped up many times in the work of the Beatles. And John Lennon, in interview, has said, sure, there were hidden messages in our music, we were doing it all the time. They knew what they were doing. But there's another way in which these messages find themselves into songs, and that's without the conscious, deliberate knowledge of the music maker. And in these instances, it's as a reflection of the state of consciousness and what resides within the overall will and intent of the creator of that piece of music. So with Led Zeppelin, through Jimmy Page, predominantly, and to a lesser extent through Robert Plant, we had a stated interest in the dark occult and in subjects such as Satanism. So that formed part of the consciousness of those guys when writing that song. And according to researchers into this subject and many scholars of it as well, because there's this whole area of study known as reverse speech therapy, which states that when we speak ordinarily, just like I am now, we unknowingly encode into what we're saying expressions of what's in our consciousness, what's on our mind. And often these messages can be discerned when that speech is listened back to in reverse. So there's a guy by the name of David Oates, an Australian, who has been practicing this art for almost the past 40 years. He said he discovered it by accident when he had a load of speech on a dictation machine and he accidentally dropped it down the toilet. And when he fished it out, it would only play backwards. So he was listening to all this stuff, which at first sounded like gobbledygook, but then he thought he was discerning certain messages coming through. So he listened more closely and realised that there was actually something to this. And he tried it on his family and friends and colleagues and realised that messages do get encoded into speech backwards. So if that's happening when we're speaking, it can also be coming through in the lyrics of songs, if that phenomenon is a very real thing. And that, I think, is what we were witnessing with Stairway to Heaven, and it's what we've been witnessing with many rock songs from musicians who've been dabbling in these sort of subject areas and have had interests in the likes of Crowley and his various workings. Incidentally, Crowley would appear to be the correct pronunciation of his name. A lot of people pronounce it Crowley, as I did for many years, but it's an Irish name, goes along with other Irish surnames such as Rowley, and so it would appear to be Crow rather than Crow, so the correct pronunciation is actually Aleister Crowley. So, referring to these claims of backmasked messages in Stairway to Heaven, unsurprisingly, the band themselves have always refuted the claims. Swan Song Records, Zeppelin's own label, issued the blunt statement, "Our turntables only play in one direction, forwards," in a 1983 interview with Musician magazine. Robert Plant stated, "To me, it's very sad, because Stairway to Heaven was written with every best intention, well, possibly through their conscious minds it was, but there was other stuff residing in their subconscious. And as far as reversing tapes and putting messages on the end, that's not my idea of making music." Well, maybe there's other forces at work here. And Led Zeppelin removed any ambiguity when it came to the lyrics for their later song, Houses of the Holy, however, which included the lyrics, "From the houses of the holy, we can watch the white doves go. From the door comes Satan's daughter, and it only goes to show, you know, and Let the music be your master. Will you heed the master's call? Oh, Satan and man. So I guess that one just slipped through the net accidentally. We come on now to the subject of some of my recent talks at the various gigs I've been doing. I actually retired this part of the talk with the event that I did in Norwich last weekend, because with the content from my Musical Truth 3 soundbites, what I'm doing is every few gigs, I'm throwing out the stories that I've been talking about up to that point and replacing them with some fresh content. And that's so that the audience doesn't get bored with hearing the same old stuff if they want to come to more than one event. And it also stops me getting bored of reciting the same old stories over and over. So the story involving Somerset Belanoff has now been jettisoned from the routine, but this is one last rendering of this particular story because it does tie in with Aleister Crowley, and it also ties in to Jimmy Page. So Somerset Belanoff is this mythical character who reminds me very much of the character of Kaiser Soze from the movie The Usual Suspects. So in that film, the other characters are debating whether Kaiser Soze is actually a real individual or whether it's an invented persona designed to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who hears the name. And it seems to be very similar with Somerset Belanoff. So she's described as the Illuminati Queen. She's said to be a cousin of the Queen on her mother's side, coming down out of Glamis Castle in Scotland, that particular ancestral bloodline. She's said to be extremely high-ranking when it comes to the so-called elite hierarchy. And she's connected into the music industry through having apparently had an affair with Jimmy Page in the early 1970s. So Somerset Belanoff, she's got several names, but it's reduced to just Somerset Belanoff, is said to have been born in 1951, which would make her 71 years of age now. And so in 1971, round about those times, she would have been in her early 20s. And she's said to have been in a romance at the time with Jimmy Page. Well, this brings us on to an anecdote which was related by the guy on the far left here, who was the manager of Led Zeppelin for some time, a guy by the name of Peter Grant. And in an interview that he gave to a music magazine in the 1980s, he recounted an anecdote regarding having taken Somerset Belanoff up to this old spooky house in Hampstead, North London, sometime in the early 70s, alongside Jimmy Page. So this is how the anecdote goes. One day, we all went up to Hampstead, where some of Jimmy's Golden Dawn associates, this is the Order of the Golden Dawn, it's another of these mystery school secret societies, which Aleister Crowley was involved with, had a big old spooky house. Well, we get there, and there's this intense feeling of dread and darkness, like pure evil in the house, and it didn't seem right to bring a young girl to such a place. Now, these old guys were like real old-school evil sorcerers, and straight away they start moving their hands around in the air, and you can see Lilibet's, which is Grant's name for Belanoff, chair start to shake. Then one of the guys starts making gestures with his right hand, like in a choking motion, and pointing it towards Lilibet's throat, and you can see it's having an effect on her. Then Lilibet gets a look of complete satisfaction on her face, and she stands up and throws her arms in the air, and at that very moment, everything made of glass explodes. Then, two other things happened at the same time. The room became warm again immediately after everything shattered or exploded, and at the same moment, the radio in the corner of the room came on and started playing that song by the Lovin' Spoonful, Do You Believe in Magic, in a Young Girl's Heart. Then Lilibet does a little spin and a bow with this innocent smile, and as she leans down over the old sorcerer with the shattered hand and the one with the shattered glass eye, she says, "That, gentlemen, is the way we do it up at Glamis." Now, Somerset Belanoff is also said, according to some, to have been the inspiration for some of these famous lines in Stairway to Heaven. So where we get the lyrics, there's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold and she's buying a stairway to heaven. When she gets there, she knows if the stores are all closed, with a word she can get what she came for. This is said to be a direct reference to her and to the amazing power and influence that she held in that with a word she could literally get whatever she came for. Such was her standing in society. She was also said to be the May Queen in the song. So in the section that I just played you, where you've got the backmask message, you've got the lyric, if there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. It's just a spring clean for the May Queen. Well, she was referred to as the May Queen due to the fact that she's said to have been born on the 1st of May in 1951. The 1st of May being a very important date in the occult calendar, particularly in pagan ritual. It's May Day, replete with all the fertility rituals that involves, celebrating the rebirth of the sun and its movement towards its high point at the summer solstice, the last 8th of the year, beginning on the 1st of May. It's also known as Walpurgisnacht and Beltane in these ancient traditions. So Somerset Belanoff is said to have been the May Queen. Now, going into another of these mystery schools involving Crowley, the AA, nothing to do with alcoholics or automobiles. This is Argentum Astrum, meaning the silver star. And as part of the routines involved in that organisation, they had what were referred to as grade signs, which also came out of the OTO. And this is very similar to the art of semaphore, of communicating messages, meaning, through striking various bodily poses. So what we have here is some examples of grade signs in action coming out of those organisations. And going back into the music industry, I can't help but to think of the sleeve to the Beatles' 1965 album, forming the soundtrack to the film of the same name, Help. So when this album came out, it was largely assumed that we had the four Beatles striking semaphore poses and acting out the four letters of help, so striking the pose for H-E-L-P, but this turns out not to be the case. That's not what these letters spell out, and they are in fact grade signs coming out of these traditions. It's the first of many links that we have to the Beatles. In so many ways, Crowley was the original rock star, with ritual sex magic and mind-altering drugs ever present in his life story. Crowley's influence on or associations with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimmy Page and Jay-Z are well documented. More of those as we go on. His deification by pop culture goes much further, however. The Doors' 13 album shows the band posing with a ceramic bust of Crowley. Steven Tyler of Aerosmith, it's a surprise, isn't it, has talked of practicing Crowley magic, and Frank Zappa and Sting, there he is again, have both been students of his works. So it's like sex and drugs and rock and roll when it comes to Crowley. He predated the rock and roll era by a couple of generations, but the rest of it is certainly there. Here's that aforementioned Doors album sleeve, the back cover of it, where you've got Jim Morrison and the boys crowded around a stone bust of Crowley. Ozzy Osbourne, another surprise, called Crowley a phenomenon of his time and recorded a song called Mr. Crowley. He called it Mr. Crowley actually, got it wrong. David Bowie referred to Crowley in his song Quicksand from the album The Man Who Sold the World. Graham Bond claimed to be Crowley's illegitimate son and recorded albums of what have been said to be satanic rituals with his band Holy Magic. Iron Maiden's famous song The Number of the Beast is thought to be in part reference to Crowley's self-imposed moniker. Daryl Hall of the duo Hall & Oates, it's always the ones you least suspect, reportedly owns a signed and numbered copy of the Book of Thoth and has said in interview, "I was fascinated by him, Crowley, because his personality was the late 19th century equivalent of mine. A person brought up in a conventionally religious family who did everything he could to outrage the people around him as well as himself." And what I thought would be really charming and delightful for us all is to take a listen to Ozzy Osbourne's tribute to Aleister Crowley. You know, it's a heartwarming piece, and it will put us all in a nice positive frame of mind, I thought. So, should we have a listen to that?
Mr. Crowley, what went on in your head? Oh, Mr. Crowley, did you know it today? Your eyes have to me since I'm ready. Well, I'm feeling all. You fool for being so ready. You waited on the second floor, Mr. Charming.
So there we are, nice little excerpt to set us up for the rest of the evening. I think it might be a good opportunity to take our brief break now, just for about 10 minutes or so. Don't want to let it linger on too long. We'll crack on with part 2 as soon as we can, but a quick comfort break for about 10 minutes. Got copies of all my books over here with my assistant ready for you, if anyone wants to grab hold of any. We have t-shirts and hoodies as well as mugs, and other than that, I'll see you for part 2 in about 10 minutes. Cheers.
Hiya, can I just give a little plug for this event? Pete, do you want to tell me what this is about? Yes, Mark Devlin's on it, and some guy called John Hamer and Steve James, which I think is at the back there. Pete's going to tell me what it's about. What's the way, Pete? There you are.
Hello everyone. Just to let you know, there is a couple of events coming up in Middlesbrough that I've organised. They are the 28th of May, 11th of June and the 9th of July. And we've got an all-day conference on the 9th of July with John Hamer, Mark Devlin and Steve James. It's pretty well based on the occult. I think you'll like it. I also think Mark's doing a similar talk to the one that you're listening to now. So if you could attend, we'll be very grateful. I think you'd enjoy it. If you would like to purchase tickets, there's an email at the bottom of the leaflet that should be on your chairs. And you can book through there. Tickets for the all-day event are £18 per person, but that's for all 3 speakers. That's for the whole day. There's tea and coffees provided. And for the evening events on the 28th of May and the 9th of July, tickets are £5 at entry. There will be a bar. June, sorry, for the 11th of June, 11th, yeah. So, yeah, if you could make it, I'd love to see you there, and I'm sure the speakers would love the encouragement as well, and I think you'll all enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my birthday party on the 11th of June, so nobody will be going to your event, sorry. It'll all be at my garden party.
All right, well, it's settled down nicely, so I guess we'll press on. So, looking at some more references to Crowley and his various workings in the output of certain A-list musicians, we come to David Bowie. And he put out a song called Quicksand from his 1976 album, I believe. I'll probably get pulled up on that if it's incorrect. But he had the lyric in there, I'm closer to the golden dawn, again a reference to the Order of the Golden Dawn, immersed in Crowley's uniform of imagery. I'm living in a silent film portraying Himmler's sacred realm of dream reality. Then some other references. Russell Brand, hardly a rock star, though he'd like to be, has publicly quoted him, Katy Perry's mind control handler, so quite close. While Kanye West, taking a day off from the Baphomet designs, has worn a necklace depicting the Aeon of Horus as espoused in Crowley's teachings. American Idol singer Adam Lambert, Kevin Jonas of the Jonas Brothers, and singer and actress Taylor Momsen are among those to have recently been pictured sporting Crowley t-shirts. Brave New World author and eugenicist Aldous Huxley was a personal friend of Crowley, as was James Bond creator Ian Fleming, and LSD guru and CIA agent Dr. Timothy Leary talked of continuing his work during the 1960s counterculture era. So the Ian Fleming link is very interesting to me. I've been invited to speak at the Glastonbury Symposium in July this year, and I've been asked to take a step away from my usual type of output to discuss occult aspects of the James Bond character and of Ian Fleming himself. Ian Fleming had major connections to the world of military intelligence. He worked out of the Naval Office during World War II, and where you find connections going into the world of military intelligence, mind control and satanic ritual abuse is often not far from the surface. Neither is occult ritualistic activity. All of these things seem to go hand in hand. And another unfortunate element which always gets thrown into the mix is that of pedophilia. One thing just seems to overlap into another in all these subject areas. So Ian Fleming would appear to have known a thing or two about a thing or two. Besides the James Bond stories, he also wrote the original novel of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, later made into a film. The screenplay was written by his friend Roald Dahl, fellow author, but also a military intelligence asset, just as Ian Fleming was. And in that version of the story, you had the character of the child catcher being brought in to capture all the children, as his name suggests. And this was the character portrayed by Russell Brand in the deeply occult opening ceremony of the London 2012 Olympics, an absolute symbolism fest. So Fleming, it's reported, worked alongside Aleister Crowley very late in Crowley's life in the Office of Naval Intelligence. So Crowley died in 1947, very soon after the end of World War II. So it's very much his latter period. But there are some researchers who think that Ian Fleming played the role of Crowley's handler for the time that they worked together. Crowley was recruited by British military intelligence for his insights into certain military tactics, given his occult perspective on things. So this becomes very interesting, as does the fact that when Ian Fleming, coming out of his military intelligence years, began his career as a novelist, and he published the very first James Bond story in 1952, Casino Royale, he appears to have based the main villain, the original Bond villain, a character by the name of Le Chiffre, which means the cipher or the sign in French, on Crowley. So the picture on the right is from a website which specialises in artistic interpretations of characters from the Fleming novels based on how Fleming himself described them in his writings. And that's how Le Chiffre comes out looking. The thing he's sticking up his nose is a Benzedrine inhaler, which was this habit that he was given in the story. And then on the left we have the original Crowley. So there does seem to be something of a resemblance there. And according to many, the character of Le Chiffre was actually, in many parts, Crowley. I'm pretty sure that the character portrayed by Joss Ackland in the Pet Shop Boys movie, now what was the title of this? This was 1987. I'm forgetting the name of it. Was that? No, you Were Never Here. That's it. It was called You Were Never Here. And it's where the video to Always On My Mind is taken from. And in that video, and also featured in the film, you have the actor Joss Ackland. Here he is. It's very dark in that image, but he looks very much to me as if he's paying homage to Aleister Crowley, looking very similar to him in the black hat there. Even in the world of rap and hip-hop, it would seem that the influence of Crowley has reached. This is Jay-Z from a few years ago sporting a sweatshirt with the phrase, "Do what thou wilt," coming directly out of Crowley's Thelema philosophy, and putting forward that phrase into the consciousness of that generation of hip-hop fans. Then we also have another rapper who never got anywhere near the dizzy heights of fame that Jay-Z did, more on the underground circuit, but an individual who went by the name of Ab-Soul, who publicly has spoken of his infatuation with Aleister Crowley. I've got an excerpt from an interview here where he's just expanding on that slightly.
My album is called Do What Thou Wilt, and it's based off, it's influenced by Crowley's The Book of the Law. Love, Thelema. Love is the law, love is the only law, love under will, the law is for all. And, you know, if you read the Christian Bible...
All right, he's not the most eloquent individual. He doesn't really say much more about it than that, but you get the idea. He's just espousing the workings of this individual, again, to a whole different demographic of music consumer. Now, when it comes to Crowley's birth date of 12th of October, there's a couple of very interesting overlaps back into the world of music that I think are worth considering. One concerns the tragic death of this individual, a young woman by the name of Nancy Spungen, who was the girlfriend of the bassist in the Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious. So she died on the 12th of October, Crowley's birthday, in 1978 in the Chelsea Hotel in Manhattan, New York. This is an extremely fascinating location to study when it comes to connections to musicians, but also film directors, playwrights, poets, novelists, people from all manner of the arts hold themselves up at the Chelsea Hotel for some period or other, for some reason or other. I've got a list of them in Volume 2 of Musical Truth, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. Stanley Kubrick was there for a while. Arthur C. Clarke wrote the screenplay for 2001: A Space Odyssey there. So many musicians, so many other famous names were in the Chelsea Hotel for some reason. All kinds of legends and myths attached to this place as well. Reportedly, in the basement, there were satanic rituals taking place. There have been reports of people walking around in robes and the sound of chanting coming from down there in the basement. And it's also said to have housed some sort of mind control facility, which makes a lot of sense when it comes to many of these stories. And this is where Nancy Spungen met her end. We're told, according to the official story, that this was at the hands of Sid Vicious, who, in a heroin-induced haze, just stabbed her to death several times. That seems to be a very simplistic answer to the question of how she died, and I do feel there's much more to that story than meets the eye. I go into it in some more detail in Volume 2. I suspect a major high-level cover-up going on there at the hands of the NYPD. Sid Vicious himself didn't last much longer. He was dead by the 3rd of February 1979 at the ripe old age of 21 from a heroin overdose. Nancy was 20 when she died. So that was 12th of October 1978. Then we go back to the 12th of October 1969, and this is where we start to get some more connections into the world of the Beatles, a group you can study endlessly and never get bored. Well, I don't anyway, because their story is just utterly fascinating. There's all manner of synchromysticism at work when it comes to this particular group. I believe there are paranormal, supernatural forces outside the realms of human planning that are making so much of this stuff happening, because it's just not possible for a group of individuals to get around a table with some pens and paper and a flip chart and plan all this stuff. It has to be happening at the hands of some other unseen force. Anyway, we're into this enduring conspiracy theory, which is known as Paul is dead. And I've mentioned this several times before in my talks, many of them here, I believe, at this location. It concerns the idea that the original Paul McCartney died in 1966. The date given for this in so many versions of the account is 9/11, so that's September 11th or November 9th, depending on whether it's the American or the British rendering of the date. 9/11/66. The idea is that it was some sort of sacrificial occult ritual, and that McCartney was replaced by an individual who's been playing the public role from that day to this. My own standpoint on this particular subject area tends to get revised with each new volume of Musical Truth that I bring out, on the basis of new information and evidence that's come across my radar. So whereas in volume 1 of the book, I was very much going along with this conspiracy theory and this idea that the individual that we have today is not the biological original Paul McCartney, my standpoint on it now is that the original Paul may not have died in 1966 or at any other time, and the individual we have today may well be the original biological Paul McCartney. But what we can know for certain, because there's no evidence to back up the other aspects of the story, is that there has been at least more than one Paul McCartney presented to us publicly all these decades. We can see this through the photographic evidence available, we can see it through video footage, and there's all kinds of other proofs of this. There's been more than one, possibly more than two, but it's not the case that there's been one singular Paul McCartney throughout all these decades. I mean, that's a mind screw in itself. It then comes down to working out which one is which in terms of public appearances and such, but it's definitely a psyop, and the only way these kinds of mind control operations can be pulled off is with the full complicity of the military intelligence communities. Otherwise, the whistle would have been blown on it pretty much from the get-go. So the idea holds that the original McCartney died in '66, and that there were various symbolic clues pointing to this ritual, which were put into the Beatles' music in terms of the recordings, but also into photographs and in particular record sleeves. There were many clues said to have appeared on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released in 1967. We'll get onto that shortly. There were also several clues which are said to have been included on the sleeve to the Beatles' Abbey Road album, released in October of 1969. This is where you got the four Beatles walking across the zebra crossing in that iconic scene just across the road from EMI recording studios. You got Paul McCartney in a loose-fitting suit, and he's barefoot, walking out of step with the other Beatles. And according to many who've interpreted the symbology here, this denotes that McCartney is playing the part of a corpse. This got noticed by a whole community of eager young researchers on the American college campus circuit upon the release of Abbey Road in 1969. And the whole idea really gained prominence in the American mindset as a result of these students phoning into various college radio stations and reporting what they believed they'd found by way of clues on this album sleeve. The whole thing really got into the public mindset as a result of one particular show which went out on the program of a DJ by the name of Russ Gibb on a station on a college campus circuit in Detroit, Michigan. And the air date for this particular show was the 12th of October, 1969, which is Aleister Crowley's birthday. The idea of McCartney having died in 1966 and having been replaced was pushed majorly in this book, which originally appeared in 2009, credited to an author and an encoder by the name of Thomas E.U. Harriot. It's called The Memoirs of Billy Shears, and it purports to be the autobiography of the individual that's been playing the role of McCartney since 1966, an individual by the name of William Shepherd, or in some versions of the story, William Campbell, who goes by the nickname of Billy Shears. Hence the line on the opening track of the Sgt. Pepper album, 1967, "So may I introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears." That supposedly was the public's introduction to the guy that was now playing the role of McCartney. Also in this book, Hugh Harriot, or McCartney writing through him, or Billy Shears writing through him, makes the claim that the individual we have playing the role of Paul McCartney now is actually an illegitimate offspring of Aleister Crowley, because so much of the ritual and the symbolism involved in this sacrifice was derived from the various works of Aleister Crowley. And here's a couple of pictures which become quite interesting to study side by side. We have a young Aleister Crowley on the left, and we have the son of Paul McCartney, or the Paul McCartney that we have today, James McCartney. Actually, Paul's original name, his first name, is actually James Paul McCartney, and James was also the name of his father, so it's come down through the family bloodline. But this is effectively the son of Paul McCartney, and he's looking quite similar there, from what I can make out, to Aleister Crowley. And this, to many, reinforces the argument that this was an illegitimate son of Aleister Crowley. And here we have the Sgt. Pepper album, where the Beatles had lined up a whole bunch of their icons, their heroes. They said these were their inspirations. These were the people that inspired them to really throw themselves into their art and get creative. And in the back line there on the far left, we find Aleister Crowley, whose real name was Edward, by the way. Aleister was an adopted name that he just chose to use for himself. And then when it comes to possible illegitimate offspring of Aleister Crowley, we can't leave out Barbara Bush, the wife of George Bush Sr. Both she and he are now sadly departed. I'm sure we're all very saddened to hear of that news. But anyway, we have Barbara Bush looking very similar there to Crowley. I forget her maiden name. Anyone remember? Barbara something. Can't remember what it was. But anyway, seems to be a bit of a family resemblance going on there as well. And the claim has been made many times that she did actually derive from the Crowley bloodline. And if both of these instances are true, it means that Paul McCartney is the uncle of George Bush Jr., which is a terrifying thought. As we get towards the end, this presentation is going to start going in some unexpected directions, which is what I like to do with my books and with my talks. And we're getting in here to some writings involved in this particular book, coming from Crowley, The Method of Science, the Equinox, the Aim of Religion. And this is where my current book, Musical Truth 3, ends up as well, in terms of subjects being discussed, because we're getting into spiritual and metaphysical realms. Crowley, in this book, analysed, of all things, the lyrics contained within famous nursery rhymes. And he decoded the great spiritual truths that were being communicated through these means. I remember Santos Bonacci talking about this at a presentation in Truth Juice Birmingham that I saw him at many, many years ago. And it absolutely blew my mind. And I thought that these were Santos's decodes of these nursery rhymes. And he revealed at the end of the presentation that he'd taken it all from Crowley, which is amazing. So in this particular book, Crowley writes, every nursery rhyme contains profound magical secrets which are open to everyone who has made a study of the correspondences of the Holy Kabbalah. To puzzle out an imaginary meaning for this nonsense sets one thinking of the mysteries. One enters into deep contemplation of holy things, and God himself leads the soul to a real illumination. Hence also the necessity of incarnation. The soul must descend into all falsity in order to attain all truth. So all of that sounds very noble and very benevolent, and it leaves Crowley sounding as if someone that wanted to assist humanity in its evolution. And that may well be an aspect to major parts of his work. It's very difficult to get the truth of what his real motives were and what his true nature was, because by his own doing, he was referred to as the Great Beast 666 within the highly conservative Victorian era in which he lived. He seemed to revel in that kind of public image. He seemed to court controversy. He seemed to like that kind of attention. There are stories of him as a youth enjoying torturing cats and other animals. There are reports of his having taken part in rituals which involved human sacrifice. Certainly in one of his writings, he talks about a young prepubescent boy representing the perfect pure sacrifice in one such ritual. And also there's reports of his having taken part in sex magic rituals involving every kind of bodily discharge you can imagine and probably don't want to. So this is all pretty horrific and dark stuff. It's difficult to know how much of this is truth and how much of it might have been levelled against him by those who wish to smear his reputation. But certainly there are aspects of his work which do appear to be noble and benevolent and have the advancement of the human experience in mind, such as these writings. So what he's addressing in his decode of so many of these nursery rhymes is this process which is said to take place within the human body, or it has the opportunity, the potential to take place within the human body roughly once a month from about the age of 12 going all the way up through adulthood. And it's been described as the raising of the chrism oil or the claustrum oil in some versions of it. And it's brain chemistry, effectively, whereby this oil, which is said to be holy and sacred in terms of the symbolism, is secreted in various parts of the human brain. It then travels down the spinal column all the way to the sacrum, where it begins a process of purification, and it then ascends all the way back up the spinal cord again and goes back up into the human brain. And it's a much more complex process, but it involves a section of the human brain known as the claustrum. And there's a lot of symbolism going on which ties directly into the Christmas story that we have, such as the bringing of great gifts, gifts of great knowledge, and the figure of Santa Claus being based on the claustrum, this section of the brain in which so much of this magic happens. So according to Crowley's decodes, this magical internal alchemical process was put into the lyrics of many children's nursery rhymes so that it would strike a chord with that kind of primal archetypal knowledge of this story that exists within all of us and just needs to be reawakened. And it can be achieved through things like poems and stories and allegories in movies and books and this kind of thing. And so it was put into nursery rhymes for that very reason, so that it would trigger existing memories lying dormant and reawaken them within the human psyche. So he starts off with the example of hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock struck 1, the mouse ran down, hickory dickory dock. Crowley writes, here we are on higher ground at once. The clock symbolises the spinal column, or if you prefer it, time, chosen as one of the conditions of normal consciousness. The mouse is the ego, mus, a mouse, being only some, I am, spelt Kabbalistically backwards. This ego, or prana, or kundalini force being driven up the spine, the clock strikes 1, That is, the duality of consciousness is abolished and the force again subsides to its original level. Pretty unique interpretation of that rhyme, I'm sure you'd agree. Then, incredibly, we have Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, for anyone who's ever wondered what all this is about. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty got a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't set up Humpty Dumpty again. This is so simple as to hardly require explanation. Humpty Dumpty is of course the egg of spirit, and the wall is the abyss. His fall is therefore the descent of spirit into matter. And it's only too painfully familiar to us that all the king's horses and all his men cannot restore us to the height. Only the king himself can do that. And the king refers to the sovereign man or woman. And there are plenty more such interpretations within this particular book. As I say, this is where the story of Musical Truth 3 ends. This is the culmination of the trilogy of books that I've written concerning my findings regarding the true nature of the controlled corporate music industry. I didn't really want this series to go on endlessly, and there was always the danger that I could have been writing Musical Truth Volume 71 if I get to live that long. But I did really want to cap this on a trilogy, and with each one of these books, as anyone that's read any of them will be familiar, I do like to try and leave things on an uplifting, inspirational note, because a lot of the rest of the material is obviously quite dark and devastating in nature, and I don't want to leave things on that vibe. I would rather leave the reader with some sort of positive hope and inspiration. And so that's where this trilogy concludes, by looking at the large number of rock music records which seem to have also encoded this internal alchemical process, the raising of the chrism oil, into their lyrics. So I've cited a few examples. Many of them have come out of the work of Charlie Freak, just to give credit where it's due. Charlie Freak, the researcher who goes by that name after the Steely Dan song, has done some great decodes of hundreds of rock records now, and he's shown how these spiritual truths have been encoded into them. So I cite just a few examples in Musical Truth 3. That's the vibe on which I wanted to end that book, and it's pretty much the vibe on which I want to end this talk. This one is a bit shorter and sweeter than usual. As I say, it's me straying out of my familiar subject area in many ways. But tomorrow, for those of you that can make it, I will be back here to do another talk, kicking off at 1 p.m, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this one, because it concerns one of the musical artists who's fascinated me the most, Prince, Occult Aspects Of. It's a talk in 2 parts. It's the first time I've presented this information publicly, and it's going to be an absolute cracker for those of you that could be here for it. Other than that, thanks for listening.
Before we have any questions, can I just say happy birthday for yesterday, Mark. Everybody in the room has signed that card. And
another revolution of the sun around the earth and not the other way around. Oh, controversial.
I told Mark this afternoon, we've run out of what to buy you. We'll give you a present every time you come home. But guess what? We found another one. Oh, he's got that one, don't he? Oh, damn. Hang on, I'll come back. Got that one. Bet you haven't got this one. Ian Fleming's Secret Wall. There you go. So, you mentioned Ian Fleming in your talk, so there you go. It's a library book, so if you could have it back by June. Yeah, I know.
Great cabal. Great name.
Yeah, great. So, if you wouldn't mind, thanks ever so much for coming and supporting Truth Seekers Northeast. I'll see you all tomorrow. The list that's going round about the Michael Albanese Comedy Club, If you can hand it back to me, and then I'll let Michael know how many people are interested. Okay? Bye for now.